Hi. I went ahead and decided to do a reading of Dolor and Shadow tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with chapter 17 tonight. And here is I like to call this the YouTube disclaimer now, if you understand the history of chapter 13. So I am reading Dolor and Shadow by Angela V. Chrysler. I am the author and the publisher and have full rights to do this. And today we are reading chapter 17. And if for whatever reason you want to purchase these books, they are available on Amazon. The ebook is on sale for 99 cents until January 31st. Correction, December 31st. And the paperback is also on sale. It's down to, I believe, $12 and change. And there is a Goodreads giveaway going on right now. 20 paperbacks of Dolor and Shadow looking for a home. And that giveaway ends on the 31st of January 2016. So, or you could just tune in every day and listen to me read it. So, if you're more into the audio. So, again, here we are. And this is a dark epic fantasy. And if you are also joining us late to the party, we do have available all book readings. They are posted on YouTube, my website, and Pinterest, and anywhere else you can literally think of. My Google Plus account, Twitter account even is there. So, Facebook, yeah, literally it's wherever I am, they are. Okay. The last relenting flames burned with seemingly less ferocity than they had moments ago. Smoke billowed into the sky above Strandal, casting the early day into dusk like shadows that mingled with steam from the bodies. Dagon no longer saw where the smoke ended and the clouds began through the haze. Behind him, the clink of shackles broke the silence as the Dokkafa detained the handful of prisoners they had selected to slaughter on ceremony. The pang from his wounded shoulder had dulled to a steady pulse as he stumbled over the bodies through the morning mist. He no longer tasted the blood and sweat on his dried lips. Kallan was beyond medicine now. If he could save her at all, he would need Gudrun. Gudrun! Dagon's voice shook over the silenced battlefield. Kallan's limp body swayed with every misjudged step over the dead. He afforded himself a quick glance at the queen in his arms. A single stream of blood flowed across her brow, draining her life with every drop. She was too pale. Dagon doubled his pace. Catching his foot on a broken shield, he fell to one knee and grunted in pain. His breath punched the air. Gasping, his senses reeled, and he shifted Kallan's weight with him as he studied the battlefield for a more definitive path. He pushed himself back to his feet and took a step, lost his footing, found it again, and continued through the mutilated flesh and broken corpses, abandoning all interest in where his feet landed. The memory of an infant eclipsed his rising panic. "You won't break her," Eolf had barked, and amid laughter he didn't bother to hide. Desperate to engage his king with political matters, Dagon had pressed the issue. "I didn't come to pass my congratulations, Eolf. The Duvalgal king can wait. Insignia will do well to learn some patience anyway," Eolf had said. "Here." Before Dagon could object, the proud king had shoved the fussing infant into his arms. A hearty laugh mocked his awkwardness, but Dagon had been too busy trying to balance the fragile princess away from his armor to notice. His face had flushed with surprise as he tried to shift the child without dropping her. His tunic had started to stick to his back. "It's rare that a captain earns the privilege of humility," Eolf had chortled. "Usually that virtue is reserved for a soldier of lesser ranking." But humility had been far from his mind as the infant ceased her wailing. With her iridescent lapis eyes, so much like her mother's, she stared at his large face buried beneath a mass of wild red hair. He'd never held a child before in his life. "Dagon!" Dagon glanced down at Kallan's face. She was white as death. "Gudrun!" His voice pierced the chill in the air. Worry gave him way to panic as he pondered the chance of Gudrun's death, and at once started looking among the dead, searching the thousands for a familiar streak of silver hair or ancient empty eyes no longer glistening with gold. A distant shape formed within the fog. Dagon strained to see through the steam, the smoke, and the haze. His panting started to regulate into steady breaths when he recognized the minute frame hobbling with a hurried step and a familiar madness. From the edge of the valley where the mist had cleared, Gudrun scurried over the corpses. His blood voiced with relief, and again he doubled his pace, tripping as he ran to meet her. "Out of the way, out of the way!" she said as she drew near. Dagon had no time to explain, nor did he need to. With her hands already upon Kallan's brow, Gudrun dropped to her knees, pulling Dagon and Kallan to the ground with her. Dagon watched Gudrun's ageless eyes shift about, studying her waning complexion as she shuffled about the contents of her pouch. With a hand she kept steady, she pulled the golden apple from a pouch secured to her side and sliced into the fruit. Shh. Gudrun hushed, keeping her attention on the spell. From the fruit's flesh, golden juice flowed, gleaming with glistening specks of save. Under her breath, Gudrun muttered a series of words Dagon couldn't decipher. The liquid flowed between Kallan's lips as he watched, reining his fingers. Time seemed to slow as the color returned to Kallan, bringing her life back with it until she gasped, arched her back, and opened her eyes. Kallan? Kallan, can you hear me? Will she be all right? Kallan's gaze focused on Dagon, who released a long breath as a single tear escaped his eye. Grinning, he clamped her palm to his lips. Dagon, she said, wrinkling her brow. Dagon nodded. Kallan? Alertness gave way to confusion as Kallan gazed about the silent battlefield. They knew, she whispered, playing back her last memory as the exhaustion melted from her bones, leaving a surge of strength that urged her to her feet. She pushed off the ground, motivating Dagon and Gudrun to take an arm and help her to her feet. The save supplied by Udun's apples surged through her, and Kallan breathed the chilled air with the scent of fire that mingled with the stench of burning dead. In silence, Dagon and Gudrun waited as Kallan scanned the wasteland and assessed the damage. Pockets of orange light in the distance had barely started to fade through the fog. The land was unnaturally quiet, as if hell had reached up and stilled even the scythe in the earth. Midday had passed, but the haze was too thick for the sun's light to break through. The Dakva had begun piling up the dead. A few pyres already filled the valley with their light. The Lyasafar were ready, Kallan said, looking to Gudrun and Dagon. With her head high, she resumed her command undeterred, as if she had never fallen. Where is my army? She asked. Where are my women? Your Majesty. Dagon's boot crunched on the ground as he stepped forward. We have apprehended Rune son, Lyasafar, and King of Gunir. The men are preparing him for transport as we speak. A knot formed in Kallan's throat and tightened her insides uncomfortably. Despite her captain awaiting her exclamation of glee, she clenched her teeth and nodded somberly. Kallan? Gudrun asked. Kallan forced a smile that did little to convince either Dagon or Gudrun of her feigned jubilation, and the awkwardness hung suspended in the air, encouraging Kallan to move. With renewed strength, she waded through the dead to Astrid waiting in the trees. Behind her, Dagon and Gudrun followed. We ride for Lorlenalin immediately, Kallan said with the unusual stiffness. I want to waste no time in finishing this. Find Eric. Have him start the preparations for the execution. See to it the coward king has provisions, and any wounds are treated. I want him alive and healthy when we perform the blood eagle. Kallan, Dagon said. With the Dark One and his army riding this way. Kallan looked at him. It's the perfect chance to move in, he said. Wipe them out while we have the chance. A sharp stab twisted its way into Kallan's chest. Anxiety settled to the bottom of her stomach, and she closed her hand into a fist. The Dark One dead would end this, Kallan said. We'll let him come to us, she continued toward Astrid. We'll break camp and prepare for transport, she said, not bothering to turn back. I want the living and the dead counted. No doubt Odin will be claiming many of our best tonight. Will you come see him off before we're off? Dagon asked. Odin? Kallan asked. The king, Dagon said. You've never seen him. Kallan forced down the lump in her throat. No, she said. I have not. Panic swelled in place of the excitement she had expected, and with it a realization she wasn't ready to name. So long I've dreamed of this day, she muttered, staring back at the dead and the pyres. When I might look into the eyes of the man who killed my father. A foreboding lurked in Kallan's words. To look down upon him victorious. It would confirm the end of the war, Dagon said. But I have known nothing else. Kallan's throat was dry as she felt a piece of her slipping away. Not yet, she replied, forcing the words out. There's plenty of time and too much to do. I'll see him later. Kallan could feel Gudrun's golden gaze scrutinize her, while Dagon nodded and took his leave, eager to carry out her orders. If the war ends, if Rune dies, she thought, what else would there be but the Dark One? And when he is gone, whose blood then shall I spill to avenge my father's? Her insides twisted uncomfortably. There was much more at stake, something beyond the vengeance, which Kallan didn't dare name. Tightening her jaw against the deepening urge to scream, she turned on her heel, careful to avoid Gudrun's eyes, and made her way to the trees. Her stride was strong and purposeful. Panic was settling in, and a realization that weighted her down was coming, whether she wanted it to or not. Desperate to escape the end that was closing in, she hoisted herself onto Astrid and sent him into a light canter through the trees to where no one could ever find her. To broke into fight, Rune gazed upon what little remained of Schwandal, The only living left among the dead were those too injured to save. The countless corpses made his defeat more real to him than anything he could have prepared for. The last of his hope dwindled, pulling him into despair. "Leave them," the Dokafar called to the Queen's men. "Odin can have his pick of the dead." All other conversations were too far away to decipher, making it easy for Rune to merge his thoughts until he remembered the chestnut hair that spilled over the blood-soaked earth. "Save the maiden from the boar to kill the Sidkona, whose death took what little victory I had." Rune lacked the nerve to chuckle at the irony. "The Queen will show me my death at a slow one." The fire burned to the ground as the side flames consumed the tents started to dwindle. The fog muted the light from the flames. It pained him to breathe. In a senseless hope that he may see a single captain carrying a maiden with iridescent blue eyes over the dead, Rune kept his gaze fixed on the valley. "You look as if you've lost something." The voice jarred him from his thoughts. Rune shifted his attention to a Dokafar, a warrior. Soiled and bloodied by battle, the Dokafar stood away from his comrades, stiff and cold before the Liasapa king. War braids framed a gruff face that cloaked all emotion. "Haven't I lost everything?" Rune asked, dulled by the shock of his loss. The Dokafar shrugged. "Perhaps you have. And yet you still look for hope among the dead." Once more Rune looked to the valley, decided to be uninterested in anything the Dokafar had to say. The smoke-filled fog rolled unbroken over the valley. "If it is Bergen you seek, he has the better part of a 2-day ride before he arrives," the soldier said. Rune returned his attention to the Dokafar. Curiosity awakened his pain, putting an end to his sedated dullness. "Near Borg," Rune said. The Dokafar's eyes narrowed with a secret they harbored. "I am." Pensive, Rune stared back into the valley. "A king's head is worth its weight in gold," Borg said. "A kingly ransom for a king's life is only fair, don't you think?" The sharp words were void of emotion and weighted with absolute logic. "How much would you be willing to pay?" Rune studied the confident grin. A chill swept his spine, and he fought the urge to shiver. "You're a mercenary," Rune said with pricked curiosity. Borg smiled coldly. "Everyone is at some price. What's yours?" Kallan slid from her saddle, touching her feet to the forest floor before Astrid had stopped. She was off through the thick pines and over the blanket of leaf litter as she hugged herself against the cold. There, among the thickest of trees, the canopy blocked the sky. Dagon's words rang back in her head. "End of the war," she muttered aloud, repeating the words as she pushed a path through the ferns and foliage. She hugged herself tighter. Another 3 steps brought her to the middle of a clearing where the lowest of pine branches had died and fallen. Kallan dropped to her knees, panting. She clasped her hands, tugging at her fingers, desperate for them to stop shaking. "End of the war," Kallan rocked. The words wouldn't stop, as if they were taking the last of her father away from her. "End of the war? And then what? When the king is dead, then what would I do? This war is all I've known. This war and death. What am I to do without it?" Digging her fingers into her scalp, Kallan threw back her head and screamed. Birds took flight, fluttering as their wings beat the air, then cleared, leaving behind an echo. "If I see him," Kallan hugged herself, rocking on her knees. "If I see him, I would have no choice but to see him. To see him, I would end this war. But so long as I don't see him, so long as I don't see him." Through the jumbled words, her father's face appeared. Shaking her head, Kallan pushed the memory along with the pain. Back behind her cold black wall, her anxiety eased. The forest grew still again, and she regained control of her senses. "I won't see him. I don't have to, not yet. The war still goes on, and the dark one will come." Kallan almost grinned with relief. "The dark one will come." Kallan stopped rocking and drew in a deep breath. "So long as I don't remember, so long as I don't see him." She sat a while longer until the last of her worry had ebbed. Silent, cold, control, forget. Forget it all. And there was peace once more. Having shoved aside the rising panic, Kallan shifted her knees out from under her. She would let the dark wind come to her. The men needed rest, and in Lorlenalin they could regroup. Kallan shifted, and something through the foliage caught her attention. Curious, she peered through the brush and leaf litter and stared at a sow left to rot on the forest floor. "He didn't take it," she whispered. "Why didn't he take it?"